Hello, Akshay. Am I visible? Am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am. Now it's audible. Yeah, it's
Hello.
clear, ma'am. A very warm good afternoon to one and all who joined virtually through Zoom and Facebook platform for the third day of National Webinar Series on Consumer Protection Act 2019 Rules and Regulations. So today we'll have a technical session 2 on consumer protection and e-commerce. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Chair on Consumer Law and Practice, National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. Today we have an eminent guest speaker with us, Professor Ashok R. Patil, Chair Professor, Chair on Consumer Law and Practice, National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, and Dr. Pratima Narayan, Advocate, Mediator, and Founder Partner of Tech Law Logi Consulting LLP. So I take privilege to introduce the today's chief guest, Professor Dr. Ashok R. Patil. Sir has educational qualification with BSc in Criminology and Forensic Science, LLB, LLM in Mercantile Law, and has completed his PhD in 2006. Sir has practiced as an advocate before High Court of Karnataka till 1999. Worked as a lecturer and then principal at KLE Society's BV Bellad Law College, Belgavi, from 1999 to 2008. And thereafter joined NLSIU in August 2008 as an associate professor and promoted as professor in 2011. Sir is also a course coordinator for postgraduate diploma on consumer law and practice distance education program at NLSIU. Sir has published more than 8 articles in international journal and more than 35 articles in national journal. And sir has visited more than 15 countries and has presented more than 55 research papers at national level conference and seminars. Sir has organized more than 40 training workshops, programs for non-governmental organization, consumer forum members, government and private lawyers, consumer club teachers, and others. Sir has also been awarded with number of awards, mainly Asian Law Institute Fellowship in 2010, Legal Education Innovation Award in 2013, International MacJanet Award in 2014, and University Grants Commission FIP Fellowship 2005. Sir is also an chief editor of International Journal on Consumer Law and Practice, an annual journal, and also March of Consumer Law and Practice, a biannual magazine published by Chair on Consumer Law and Practice, National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. With this brief introduction, I welcome you, sir. I also take a privilege to introduce another chief guest, Dr. Pratima Narayan, is an advocate, mediator, and founder partner of Tech Lawlogi Consulting LLP. Her expertise lies in areas information technology law, intellectual property rights, commercial contracts, and consumer protection. She is involved in legal consulting and also conducted trainings and workshops in various facets of law such as e-commerce and law, intellectual properties, and consumer advocacy. She holds a doctorate in law from National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, under the guidance of Professor Ashok R. Patil, and has served as a research associate at Chair on Consumer Law and Practice. Her PhD research was in the area of e-commerce and consumer protection. She has authored a book on e-commerce legal compliances published by Eastern Book Company. She has also offered 2 online courses on consumer protection law, essential and practice, procedure on EBC learning. She also learns a legal blog on YouTube under the name Tech Lawlogi, bringing interesting insights into the everyday legal issues like knowing more motor vehicle insurance, online food orders, evaluate, etc. With this brief introduction, I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, I request Professor Ashok R. Patil for the presentation, for the today's presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Akshay. Good afternoon to all the participants for this second day technical session. As you know, this is a digital era. There is no borders for trade, cross-border trade is happening, and every country throughout the world appreciating the digital era. And also, this is a era of COVID also, COVID era. So everybody is depending on e-commerce companies. Because of COVID, nobody is going out and everybody is purchasing online. So we should appreciate e-commerce for their dedicated work. At the same time, we should see that e-consumer protection should be there in every trade. Especially, we have seen in the past unfair trade practice, the contact, especially the manipulation of prices, many other aspects like there is no contact details of the nodal officers or sellers details. A lot of issues are there. We have seen a lot of those issues. So it is the duty of the state to protect the consumers, e-consumers, especially from these exploitation. So in this presentation, I'm taking you how e-consumer, whoever is purchasing online, how he should be protected, and under new act, Consumer Protection Act 2019 and rules 2020, how those provisions are made to protect the e-consumer. And also we have seen National Consumer Helpline, the complaints are increasing, especially on e-commerce sector. Now it is around 32%, but month to month, the complaints are increasing. In that angle, especially this particular act, new act 2019, rules 2020, gets a very, very important role to control these types of exploitation. This is the statement everywhere you have seen in the government offices as well as other offices. Ultimately, gist of this statement is consumer is a king. So consumer is helping the business manufacturer, service provider. So that is the gist of this, but what is practically happening, not in that way. So that's why state has to come out with the consumer welfare legislations. It is the duty of the state. Ultimately, in India, Supreme Constitution of India is the supreme. And yes, every manufacturer, service provider is having a right to do business, trade under Article 19(1)(g). It's a fundamental right, but at the same time, it is not an absolute fundamental right. Under Article 19, Clause 6, state can impose reasonable restrictions on trade in the interest of public. And also Article 21, right to life with dignity means right to life without exploitation. It is the duty to guarantee that everyone in this country has a right to live with human dignity and is free from exploitation. And there are two articles in the directive principles. Article 38, state to secure social order for the promotion of welfare of the people. Article 47, duty of the state to raise the level of nutrition and the standard of living and to improve public health. Looking into all these fundamental rights, directive principles, it is the state duty to protect the consumers through consumer welfare legislations. In that angle, the government of India has come out with welfare legislations. This is one of the Supreme Court judgments, constitutional bench, which says access to justice is a fundamental right and laid down four main facets of the essence of access to justice. First point, the state must provide effective adjudication mechanism. Second, mechanism so provided must be reasonably accessible in terms of distance. Third one, the process of adjudication must be speedy. Fourth one, the litigants' access to the adjudicatory process must be affordable. So these are the 4 points should exist to achieve the access to justice. So that's why always, especially under the Consumer Protection Act 2019, we are trying towards this particular concept, access to justice. Looking into the past national survey, this is a national survey done by Cuts International in 2012. Only here they have surveyed in urban, rural, and total. There are 3 groups they have made. So in these 3 groups, so question is how many people are aggrieved consumers are approaching and where? So around 5% average, considering the average of urban and rural, 5% they are approaching seller, 2% they are approaching company, 0.3% approaching consumer redressal system, 0.1% sector ombudsman, and 93.4% nowhere. They know that their right is violated. Even then, they are not exercising their right because of many reasons. Delay in disposal, or not consumer friendly, because other reasons. State has to provide infrastructure or appointment as on that date. Many reasons. One of the reason is everybody is nowadays very busy. So to file a case, they have to go physically to the consumer redressal system, file a case, they have to pay fees. So all those things happens only through physically, or you have to hire the advocate. Otherwise, it's very difficult to file a case and fight a case. So that's why majority of the people, even literates, they know that their right is violated. Even then, they are not filing a case because they think that it's a waste of time sometimes. So to avoid those issues, now throughout the Act 2019, the central government kept electronic mode so that the busy people can file a complaint online, pay the fees online, witness through video conferencing. Like that, a lot of things are recognized in the new act and rules. So our Consumer Protection Act 86 followed because that was enacted because of the United Nations guidelines on consumer protection 1985. Broad guidelines are issued by United Nations, and all the majority of the members of the UN adopted these broad guidelines. And India is the one country which has established independent redressal system exclusively for consumers through 1986 Act. And this particular UN guidelines amended in 2 times, 1999 and 2015. So they have added e-commerce, ADR, depending on the change in the trade. They have amended the UN guidelines also. Now we have a Consumer Protection Act 2019, which has come into force in 2 dates, 20th July, half of it, and another half on 24th. And rules also came into force in 20th, 24th, and e-commerce on 23rd. Those 3 dates, these rules and whole legislation came into force. As on now, whole legislation and rules are already in force. So the other the rules are there. Today we are concentrating only on e-commerce. I'm taking you throughout the new legislation 2019, wherever this electronic media or electronic word is used, so that the present consumers, aggrieved consumers, can make use of this particular, the digital era redressal system, so that they can exercise and they can get a justice. So section 2.1, section 2 discuss about the definitions. Advertisement. So advertisement word is, there was no definition of advertisement in 86 Act. They have defined And specifically, they have used the word electronic media also. So whosoever advertises in electronic media, that is also covered. Another definition, which is very, very important, section 2, clause 7, consumer definition. So from 1986 to 2019, they have added 2 explanations. Rest of the things are same. So consumer, whoever buys any goods or goods for consideration or hires a service for consideration is a consumer, no change in it. But they have added the clauses A and especially B, that is the expression buys any goods or hires or avails any services includes offline or online transaction through electronic means or by teleshopping or direct selling or multi-level marketing. Even though it was there in the 86 Act also, consumer means any person who buys any goods. Here there is no specification that he should buy physically or online. So it is a silent. So we can cover even under the 86 Act, but more clarity purpose, they have added the B explanation clause in the consumer definition. Then deficiency definition, they kept the same as it is in the 86, and now they have added 2 points. Includes any act of negligence, omission, or commission by such person which causes loss or injury to the consumer. Then second point, deliberate withholding of relevant information by such a person to the consumer. So it is the duty of the manufacturer or service provider or whosoever. So they have to provide all the necessary information to the consumer. Deliberately withholding the information is also comes under deficiency. So now they have expanded the deficiency definition by adding these 2 clauses. Then directly they have given a definitions. E-commerce under 216 means buying or selling of goods or services, including digital products over digital or electronic network. And another one, electronic service provider, means a person who provides technologies or processes to enable a product seller to engage in advertising or selling goods or services to a consumer, and includes any online marketplace or online auction sites. So it's broadly defined, and for these words, rules supports in detail to give the meaning to these 2 definitions. Next one is the service definition. The old definition they continued in the 2019. This definition, service definition, is an inclusive definition. So it's not exhaustive. There are some examples are given. That's why the word is includes, but not limited to. Not limited to, some examples which they have given. So it means includes any other services, e-commerce or any type of services which falls under this particular the service definition. So there is no confusion in this. Then another one new definition they have added, which was not there in the 86 Act, that is the unfair contract. Unfair contract means a contract between manufacturer or trader or service provider on one hand and a consumer on the other, having such terms which cause significant change in the rights of the such consumer, including following. There are 6 examples they have given, but 6th one is very important now. I will go directly to the 6th point. Imposing on the consumer any unreasonable charge, obligation, or condition which puts such a consumer to disadvantage. So that is also considered as a unfair contract under new Act. Unfair trade practice, it was there in the 86, but they have added some more clauses at the end. So unfair trade practice, making any statement, whether orally or in writing or by visible representation, including by means of electronic record, including by means of electronic record. And also a further clauses, whosoever gives false representation or false promise, that is comes under unfair trade practice. And especially warranty and guarantee, especially in online advertisements, these warranty guarantee, a lot of misleading advertisement comes when they say that warranty guarantee is there. Then it is once the consumer approaches the court or consumer commission, burden on the opposite party, whosoever is doing that particular toll claim. But we have not used, even though it was there in the 86 Act, but it was not used. At least now onwards, we can use it so that these types of misleading advertisement should not come in future. Then the clause 2 talks about permitting the publication of any advertisement, whether in any newspaper or otherwise, including by way of electronic record. So that they have added. And clause 9, disclosing to other person any personal information given in confidence by the consumer, unless such disclosure is made in accordance with the provisions of any law for the time being in force. So whenever we are purchasing online, we are putting all the data, our account number, a lot of personal data we are putting to purchase the goods online. Those information, personal consumers' personal information, which is given in confidence to the seller or service provider, that person should not share without the consent of the consumer. And anyway, if any law is there to share, that is the exception. But otherwise, no company can share personal data of the consumers to anybody. Now it is called as a data currency, a lot of costly than normal currency. Section 17, complaints to authorities. Now, authority has also, yesterday, the Chief Commissioner of Central Consumer Protection Authority spoke, and Vagish also spoke on this. Here, yesterday also, there was a question how a complaint can be made to the CCPA. So it is clearly mentioned in electronic mode also, anybody can file a complaint. Only the authority will look into consumer as a class, that a particular point, the concept they will look into, and they will take necessary action. Jurisdiction of district forum. So we have taken the especially CPC jurisdiction, copied it here. And other than that, from 86 to 2019, what new things is added is the complainant resides or personally works for gain. So that place also the consumer can file a complaint. It is applicable to even district commission, state commission, national commission, depending on the pecuniary jurisdiction. Manner in which complaint shall be made. So here also specifically given that before the district commission, the may be filed electronically in such a manner as may be prescribed. And clause 2 talks about even the payment of fees should be on electronic form. So everything, only now challenge is how state government provides infrastructure is a challenge. But especially this new legislation equipped for the digital era, only how the central government motivates the state government to implement properly and within a short period. Procedure on admission of complaint. Here also, even when once the case is filed, complaint is filed, even district commission, whatever it gives order under subsection 2 and 3, when case is filed, so that can be also informed through electronic service provider. And if because now where the consumer is residing, works for gain, their case can be filed. So the seller or service provider may not go to that place, but he can do whatever he wants to say through video conferencing. That facility is also given. Then service of notice, especially in civil court or even in consumer forum, consumer commissions, lot of delay happens because of notices, delay in notice. They may not take, or door lock, a lot of things they play with the notice, serving of notice. That's why now they included the electronic means also, especially clause 2 clearly talks about without prejudice to the provisions contained in subsection, notice required by this act may be served on an electronic service provider at the address provided by it on the electronic platform from where it provides its services as such, and for this purpose the electronic service provider shall designate a nodal officer to accept and process such notices. Due to this particular clause 2, we may expect in future there will not be any delay in serving the notices. Enforcement of orders by the district commission, state commission, national commission, that was the loophole in the 86 Act, because section 25 not allows district forum to execute its own order. So that was the loophole. Now under this new act, the power, execution power is given to the district commission, state commission, national commission, as if it is a decree of the civil court. How civil court executes its order, similarly the commission can also execute its order. Then power of state government to make rules. See, you have seen a lot of rules, even including e-commerce rules. So earlier what happens in the 86 Act, state has to frame rules, regulations, but majority of the states have not framed the rules. And even if they framed, there is no uniformity throughout India. We faced in all the issues, especially appointment or salary, many things you take, there is no uniformity throughout India. So that's why what the central government thought, yes, the section 102 gives power to state government to make rules. But until state government makes it rules, the central rules are applicable to state. See here, provided that central government may frame model rules in respect of all or any of the matters with respect to which the state government may make rules under this section, and where such model rules have been framed in respect of any such matter, they shall apply to state until the rules in respect of that matter is made by the state government. And if state government makes it, then it should be practicable and conform to the such model rules, not completely contradictory to the framed model rules. So by this way, we can bring uniformity throughout India. At the end, just I keep one latest judgment of US. It's Angela Bolger versus Amazon.com LLC, disposed on 13th August 2020 from Court of Appeal, 4th Appellate District Division 1, State of California. So here the consumer is Angela Bolger purchase of a replacement of a laptop battery from Amazon third-party seller, Lenoge Technology HK Limited. That battery, while using, burst into flames while she balanced the laptop on her thighs, resulting in severe burns to her arms, legs, and feet. The appeals court found that Amazon played a pivotal role in every step of plaintiff Angela Bolger's purchase of replacement of a laptop battery from Amazon third-party seller Lineage Technology HK Limited, which was operating under the fictitious name eLife. Bulgar alleged that the battery burst into flames while she balanced that particular laptop. In this case, the Court of Appeal unanimously decided that it's a liability on the Amazon, and also they overturned the earlier judgment of the trial court. In trial court, judgment was in favor of Amazon. Then the plaintiff filed a appeal to the Court of Appeal in state of California. Now the three judges overturned this particular lower court judgment. In its decision, the appeal court held that under established principles of strict liability, Amazon should be held liable if a product sold through its website turns out to be defective. So in detail, especially looking into this particular judgment, already the 2019 Act, rules 2000, e-commerce rules 2020 are sufficient. So we are going at the international level, whatever new concepts are coming. So the other details will be dealt by Pratima, especially on rules, consumer protection e-commerce rules 2020. So with this, I conclude. Any questions are there at the end after Pratima's presentation? Both of us together we will answer to you. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you for elaborating all the provisions relating to e-commerce under the new Consumer Protection Act 2019. Now I request Dr. Pratima Narayan to address the auspicious occasion. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you, Professor Ashok Patil. This has been a wonderful opportunity to be a part of this webinar series on consumer law. And I would also, it's always been an honor and privilege to be a part of this chair on consumer law and practice. And I've had a long association with the chair. It has been commendable that the chair has been into several activities, including being a think tank to the central government, central ministry on various projects which are of national and international importance. And the chair has also been instrumental in bringing out some of the best publications in the area of consumer protection law. So thank you very much for that and for the introduction, Akshay. And over to the subject. And in continuation with what Professor Ashok Patil has been discussing regarding the e-commerce and consumer protection law. Of course, given the COVID times that we've been in, and especially for the last 4 months, we have considered e-commerce to be the frontline warriors, and they have been also doing a great job in terms of providing us with the essentials right at our doorstep. Which has been an excellent effort by this particular sector. All said and done, there is much more that needs to go in the context of building trust and confidence and continuing the trust and confidence that these e-commerce portals need to provide to the consumers. First of all, we need to understand the very architecture of this whole e-commerce, which is a non-face-to-face. We don't see the we don't see them face to face like what happens in a regular brick and mortar system. So that is the reason why a lot more needs to be done in the context of providing trust and confidence among the consumers, for which two very important aspects are very essential here. Number one, due diligence. And the second one is legal compliance. That is compliance in the context of the kind of information that is being provided. What are the appropriate disclosures that these e-commerce companies have to make so that the consumer is well informed? I am of the opinion again that given this non-face-to-face architecture, it is very, very important that the consumer must be well informed, because that is the only thing that will enable the consumer make the right choice and make the purchase of what he or she requires. Now, given this basic brief introduction, I would like to take you through a very short presentation on these two aspects of consumer protection. Akshay, I just want to check with you if the presentation is visible.
Yeah, ma'am, it's visible. Yeah, it's visible.
And I hope the audio is also clear.
Yeah, ma'am, it's clear.
Thank you so much. So just give me a moment. Yeah, all right. So this is about the e-commerce that I'll be discussing about. It's all about due diligence and disclosure requirements. To begin with, e-commerce is basically divided into two main categories. That is inventory-based model and the marketplace model. This has been identified by the Department of Commerce way back when we were formulating the FDI policies, and the basic definition that was given to all e-commerce entities, was they were defined under the nomenclature of e-commerce entities. E-commerce business was defined, and they were broadly classified under two main groups, that is inventory-based e-commerce and marketplace e-commerce. And as Professor Patil rightly defined, he brought us to the definition of e-commerce under the Consumer Protection Act, where it defines e-commerce is all about buying and selling of goods and services and also digital products over electronic and digital platforms. So here we have three components. One is goods, the second one being services, and the third component being digital products, that is in the form of your subscriptions, the online services that you procure in the context of maybe your online, the OTTs that you procure through subscriptions, or it could be online games, online movies that you subscribe, books, ebooks, okay, and the softwares, the various softwares that we procure online. So all these fall under the category of digital products. Now, these goods, services, or digital products are provided by the e-commerce models either as an inventory, that is, they procure these goods themselves and they sell it through their platform. Or there is another way in which that these e-commerce also facilitate, that is, they create a platform where the buyers and sellers actually meet. So typically your Amazons and Flipkarts and various others fall under the category of market-based model or intermediary. Now, talking about these two forms, we'll be coming to this a little later when we discuss the e-commerce rules, because there again we have the same bifurcation of e-commerce models. Just to give you a brief introduction about the various channels through which these e-commerce operate. Of course, initially we started off with the traditional model, the conventional model, which does exist even today in the business ecosystem. That is, you have the traditional shops, and then there was the e-commerce which evolved, okay, which was mostly in the context of developing a website, creating a website, and it was that website or the web portal which actually enabled the buyers and sellers meet, or the e-commerce platform, the e-commerce seller actually sold products through the platform. So that was the e-commerce method that we had. The third one is the multi-channel. So single brand or multi-brand through different channels. That is, they start with a portal, and then you have a mobile app, and then they also selling, they're also visible on the social media. So they're trying to find all the possible electronic channels in which they can sell their products. So that is a multi-channel that we call. The fourth one, and what we see today is omni-channel, or what we see as omni-channel being the new norm. So if I want to buy a pair of glasses on Lenskart, I can also go to the nearest Lenskart store, check out on the glass. So there is both a combination of the online portal as well as the offline stores. So they're trying to give us a more seamless facility in the context of what I want to buy, right? So it's probably earlier we felt, oh, this doesn't have, this doesn't give me the touch and feel of the product. So they have tried to cater to that also, where you can go to the nearest store and you can try that out and then make a purchase online. So you have a combination, whether you want to go offline, online, or do both. So that's where we have omni-channel being the new norm. The reason why I wanted to actually bring this out also is in the context of e-commerce rules, and the e-commerce rules has identified all these channels to bring them within the ambit of what they need to follow as a matter of guidelines. Now, talking about the first part of my presentation today, that's about due diligence. So you all know, you all understand, you all appreciate what is the meaning of this whole concept of due diligence, setting up good practices in the organization, being more accountable, being more transparent, right? And exercising and carrying out the business itself in a very diligent manner. Now, is there any provision in law which talks about this due diligence which e-commerce companies have to comply with? The answer is yes. We have certain provisions under the Information Technology Act where the very first thing is these marketplace intermediaries, the marketplace platforms have been defined. That is a platform where the buyers and sellers meet. They have been included within the definition of Information Technology Act of 2000. This perhaps was the first step that we had in terms of bringing some kind of a regulation across among the e-commerce sectors. So what is it that these intermediaries have to do? There have been a trajectory of various cases, right, from I think almost a decade now, where these platforms who have been selling goods and services, who have been enabling the players come on their platform, they have time and again, whenever there is a case against these companies, they have time and again gone back to the court contending that they are only a platform and they hold no liability, or there is a complete limitation as far as their liability is concerned. But what is the extent? When can they say that they are limiting their liability, or what we call as a safe harbor? That is well defined under Section 79 of the Information Technology Act, wherein an e-commerce intermediary or the platform can take shelter under this safe harbor only if there are a few important aspects, of which one very important aspect is they must have exercised due diligence. Now, just to give you an example of various counterfeit goods which are being sold online, right? Of course, we've had eBay versus Tiffany's, and the more recent Christian Louboutin's case, or the Amway's case, and various other instances which have been which have approached the courts. What is common among all of them is that there are certain counterfeit goods which are being sold on their platform, or that there has been a trademark infringement on the part of the platform, and the platform should be held liable. But the platform says we cannot be held responsible for the million transactions that happen on our on a daily basis, and therefore we should have a limitation on our liability. But what are those measures that they need to take? There are certain precautions that they need to take, and there are certain measures that they need to take just in case something of this sort happens. They cannot completely get away from their liability, saying that we have nothing to do with what is happening on our platform. They have to be vigilant about it. So that is where the concept of due diligence comes. Now, there is also a requirement under, like I was just mentioning here in this previous slide, the intermediary, so far as they have observed due diligence while discharging their duties under the Act and observe all such guidelines as the central government may prescribe. The central government has very, very clearly prescribed certain guidelines under something called the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines Rules of 2011. What it basically mandates is, all of you have been visiting n number of websites, and at the probably if you scroll down there, you will find a few terms and conditions of the website, or privacy policies of the website, or what they call as user agreements, or whatsoever it is. Even at the sign up stage, you're supposed to say, I agree for all the terms and conditions and the user agreements or the privacy policy. What are they actually required to do? That is mandated under the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines Rules. It says that it is mandatory for all these e-commerce players, that is the intermediaries, the marketplace intermediaries, to provide rules and regulations, that is terms of use of their website, privacy policy, or what you call as user agreement. And if you look at Rule 3 of this particular intermediary guidelines rules, they very, very clearly pinpoint certain aspects which have to be mentioned in all user agreements. Number one, that they have to ensure that intellectual property infringements are not done on the platform, and that certain harmful material and certain other things are not being sold on the platform. And they also have to give appropriate disclaimers as far as minors using these platforms. Suppose, what happens if suppose there is a seller who is selling counterfeit goods, let's say a fake Adidas shoes or a Nike shoes on the platform. What is it that the e-commerce company has to do in order to stop these practices on its platform? There is a policy called takedown policy. So the guidelines rules as of what it stands today mandates that the e-commerce portal has to remove or disable harmful, harassing or obscene material within 36 hours on obtaining knowledge of any information. So if you are to write to a particular portal saying that this kind of a product is being sold or a counterfeit product is being sold or something which is harmful is being sold on the platform, it is very, very important. It's a mandate that these e-commerce platforms have to remove them within 36 hours. And they are also required to publish certain details as far as grievance officers on the website are concerned. So this has been the basic requirement of all e-commerce platforms who are online marketplace. That is, they are facilitators. They cannot get away with it. Of course, there have been many instances where parties, either business to business or business to consumers, have approached parties in order to bring in the liability of these consumers. And one of the cases, of course, this was more to do with a trademark infringement, but there are certain factors which every e-commerce company has to keep in mind when they operate through these platforms. Number one, now to bring that correlation between the seller and the intermediary and to see what is the extent of liability under Section 79, there were certain factors which were brought out under the Christian Louboutin case. Number one, what were the terms of agreements that was entered into between the sellers and the platform? Second, the manner in which the terms are being enforced. 3, the consequences of violation of these terms. 4, whether adequate measures are being taken to ensure that rights in the trademark are protected. And 5, whether these platforms have knowledge of the unlawful acts. These are some things that they'll be the determining factor to understand whether these e-commerce portals are to be liable at all or not. Of course, after 2018, there have been many cases which came up. That was Amway versus 1mg, and you also had the Amazon sellers versus Amway case, where there have been different interpretations of Section 79. But what is underlying across all these cases which have come before the courts are, the courts have been very, very particular that these e-commerce companies, these portals have to exercise due diligence. And they have to have a very robust, what we call as takedown policies. So that is something which is the underlying factor of all these cases. So this is some basic input we have as far as what is the due diligence that these e-commerce have to exercise. We have been associating with a lot of e-commerce business, and what is commonly happening, especially among the e-commerce startups, is they don't even know what needs to go into the terms and conditions, how they should protect the consumers on the e-commerce space. So that is where it becomes very, very important for the legal fraternity, lawyers, law students to understand the concept of due diligence and to have its practical applicability across these e-commerce portals. This will, to a great extent, protect consumers from any such unfair practices, especially the counterfeit goods, etc. So that's a bit about due diligence. And I will now quickly move on to the mandatory disclosures. Professor Patil did mention to us that there is a particular, on the 23rd of July 2020, we have the e-commerce rules, the consumer protection e-commerce rules. This is a very, very important step in the context of bringing some great support in the context of providing right to information among the consumers, or right to be informed is a lot more strengthened than this with this particular rules. There are two important provisions under the Consumer Protection Act, that is Section 94, which talks about the powers of the central government to frame rules to prevent unfair trade practices, especially in the e-commerce and digital selling market. And there is also a provision under Section 101 Clause 2, Subclause ZG, where the central government has the authority to make rules to prevent unfair trade practices in e-commerce. So considering these two provisions under the Consumer Protection Act, we now have the consumer protection e-commerce rules. Now, what does this particular set of rules tell us? Coming first of all to the scope and applicability of it. To whom does this apply? It applies to all those sellers who are selling goods, services, and digital products. Second, it applies to all models of e-commerce, whether it is a marketplace e-model or an inventory-based model. We discussed about what is an inventory-based model and what is a marketplace model. In case of an inventory model, it is the seller, it is the e-commerce company which actually procures the products, the goods and services, and sells it under its brand, under its name and its brand. Whereas in case of marketplace model, it only facilitates the seller and buyer to come together. The third aspect, as far as the applicability is concerned, is that it applies to all e-commerce retail, whether it is multi-channel, single brand, multi-brand retailers. So it includes all those that we were discussing of all the channels, right? Whether it is e-commerce channel, they have just a portal, they have a portal with apps and maybe on the social media as well, or it could be omni-channel where you have both physical as well as the online store. So irrespective of any kind of channel, it does apply to the e-commerce industry. Fourth, it applies to all sorts of unfair trade practices which have been defined under the Consumer Protection Act. However, it goes on to say that it does not apply to activity of a natural person carried out in personal capacity, which is not any professional or commercial activity, where we discussed about contract of personal service as under the definition of services. So that the particular rules does not apply to contract of personal service. So this is where it has been made very clear to us that e-commerce rules applies to all of these persons carrying out such activities under the in the digital markets. Going on to Rule 3, it talks about there are certain definitions under Rule 3, and it makes it very clear about what is e-commerce, who an e-commerce entity is. It also defines marketplace entity, inventory based entity. It defines who a seller is and defines also who a user is. I will not go into much detailing here, but e-commerce entities are all those who are buying and selling goods and services through digital and electronic platforms. And marketplace entity and inventory based entity have been defined. The term seller has been defined. That is, this marketplace entity will have two persons, that is the seller and the user coming onto their platforms. Seller is the one who is going to sell through this marketplace entity. That's why I have brought them under this category of marketplace entity. And then you have the users on both platforms. Users have also been defined here. If you look carefully at the definition of user, it includes both visitors as well as those who are availing the facilities under the platforms. So even if he's a visitor, he should have all those informations. He should be provided with the informations. So that is about a few definitions which you have to sort of be familiar with as under Rule 3 of the e-commerce rules. And then we have Rule 4. This is another important thing is, just going back to this, the reason why I came up with this slide is because there are 4 parties, especially under the e-commerce rules, where their duties and liabilities have been spelled out. One is the e-commerce entity, which includes marketplace and inventory, all of them. It also provides for certain duties for the marketplace entity, specific duties for inventory, and specific duties for sellers on the e-commerce platforms. Now, Rule 4 is a very important rule which talks about duties of all e-commerce entities, whether they are marketplace or inventory based. The very first thing and a very, very important step here is that all these e-commerce operators or e-commerce entities today have to be companies incorporated. This is something very, very important. This will help a lot of consumers not to be lured by, or not to get into agreements with fly-by-night kind of entities. So they have to be companies incorporated. We've been hearing of a lot of complaints where consumers have bought it on social media and they don't even find where the seller is. So this can considerably reduce this issue. We also have another important aspect under the Rule 4, which talks about appointment of nodal persons or alternate senior designated persons, just in case they don't have their business operations in India. Suppose it's a completely foreign entity, they must have some nodal persons or some designated persons in India so that we are able to ensure compliance with them. The third important aspect is the rule provides for certain information to be provided in very clear and accessible manner, which could include the names, address, contact details. In fact, there were times we were finding it difficult to even find where they are or their geographical locations for us to even send out a legal notice. But with these rules, these issues of not providing the right geographical locations or other contact details should considerably reduce. It also mandates that these e-commerce entities must provide for grievance officers. We had that even under the intermediary guidelines, and that is now provided in the consumer rules also, consumer protection e-commerce rules as well. So it is mandatory today that all these e-commerce entities must provide for an escalation of complaint in their organization itself. So it starts probably with the customer care, and if the party is not convinced, or if the party is still aggrieved, they can continue. They should be able to continue, seeking redressal at the level of the grievance officer. So unless they, probably this should help them resolve their dispute also, which is where we are trying to strengthen the right to be heard and right to seek redressal within the system itself. And another very important thing is that once these grievance officers receive complaints from the consumers, they cannot keep it for long. There is a specific timeline within which they have to address it. So it says that these grievance officers must acknowledge the receipt of consumer complaint within 48 hours, and they should redress the complaint within 1 month. Okay, so these are some of the important duties which have been outlined for the e-commerce entities. And as far as importers of goods are concerned, they have to provide the names of the importers and such other details so as to make it more transparent. From now on, there are not going to be any pre-filled check boxes. So I wouldn't even know that I have to be availing of something else for which I have to pay, or some other service that the e-commerce portal is providing me for which I have to pay. So there were a lot of pre-filled check boxes, and we are done away with it unless the consumer gives a proper consent, an express consent through a tick box, a check box. It is not considered, or it is not, nothing is deemed or nothing is implied as a acceptance here. Okay, so there cannot be any further pre-filled check boxes. More importantly, they cannot manipulate price. We had a lot of issues with the MRPs. They were, time and again we have experienced it ourselves, that they would goof up on the MRPs. They would say that MRP, though MRP was, let's say 1200, they would say the MRP is 1500. We are giving you a discount of up to 1300, but still it would be 100 rupees more than the MRP. So now they cannot manipulate prices on the MRP as under the Legal Metrology Act. And there cannot be any arbitrary classification. They cannot have specific classification, the most favored consumer kind of classifications, and give them something much more for the same price than what is not given to the other consumers. So they cannot have these classifications. There cannot be any arbitrary classification among consumers. So these are some of the important pointers we have as far as duties of e-commerce entities are concerned. What I have mentioned here is the highlights of it, what is most important for each of these players. We'll now very quickly move on to the marketplace e-commerce entities. Now that is very, very specific. Now here the model itself, please understand the model. It is where it is acting, the e-commerce entity is acting as a facilitator. It's bringing the sellers and the buyers on the platform. So these e-commerce rules are designed very, very specifically for this e-commerce entity, for this particular marketplace entity. So the first thing, like I mentioned earlier on, they have to exercise due diligence as under the information technology intermediary guidelines rules. And they are required to, and it requires the sellers to take an undertaking to ensure detailed description. So if you look at the e-commerce rules, every aspect of the description of the product is mentioned, and it is very, very important for these marketplace intermediaries to take details of all of these information while they are displaying products on the website, including the way the images should be provided, what is the description of the product, and who is the seller. All of these have to be provided by the seller. So they have to take that undertaking to ensure that these products are detailed and they are not counterfeit. And of course, they have now got to provide details of the seller on the platform. A ticket number has to be generated for tracking all sorts of complaints. They have to very, very explicitly mention details regarding return, refund, exchange, etc. They have to provide details as far as payment methods, chargeback, all these things are concerned. And last and the most important thing is they have to maintain a record of all the relevant information for identifying sellers who have repeatedly offered goods and services, and they must also remove those kind of sellers from their access if they have been charged of any kind of counterfeit goods. So it makes it very, very clear that this responsibility has to be taken by the marketplace intermediary of appropriate takedown. And if there is a repeated offender on the platform, they have to remove the offender, they have to remove the seller from the platform. So this is another very important point as far as these marketplace intermediaries are concerned. The next one is rules with regard to sellers on the marketplace. So again, they have gone a little more into detail, saying that what is it that the sellers have to do on this marketplace. The very first thing, we have all experienced this, that many a times the sellers themselves give a lot of reviews on the platform. So they write whatever they want. They say, oh, this product is extremely good, you must buy it. They pretend to be consumers, but the rules make it very clear now that these sellers cannot make any false representation of itself as a consumer, or they cannot post reviews about the goods or services or misrepresentation. That will be taken very, very seriously. And the second point is they cannot refuse to take back goods or withdraw or discontinue the services if it is found to be defective, deficient, spurious. So they cannot keep passing the blame across others. If something is wrong and if the goods are defective, they have to take it back. There has to also be a prior written contract with the respective e-commerce entity. So they have to have something in writing. All these sellers will have to have something which is either in writing or in electronic form, which talks about an agreement between the seller and the e-commerce entity. So they cannot just be some fly-by-night sellers on the marketplace platform. It is very important for these sellers to give one total price. The total price has to be given in one figure, one number has to be given. So they cannot keep breaking it down to so many components. They have to give one particular number as far as the price is concerned. And relevant details, you must have been hearing, and there was a lot of discussion on this, that these sellers have to provide country of origin as far as the products are concerned. That is mandatory now. And accurate information has to be provided in terms of exchange, what their refund policies are, if there is any cost of return shipping, so in all those things, they have to provide those details. They have to provide details as far as delivery, shipment, guarantee, warranty, etc. are concerned. So this is the duty, this is the bounden duty of the seller on the platform, on the marketplace platforms. Lastly, as far as the rule for inventory-based e-commerce entities are concerned, that is, I am selling the products which I have got. It's like an online retailer. So what is it that this inventory-based entity has to do? So they have to provide accurate information like the other market players. They have to provide about return, refund, exchange, warranty, guarantee, etc. Payment methods, security. They have to ensure security of those payments. Total price has to be given again in a single figure. They cannot again represent as if they are consumers and make some false reviews, provide some false reviews, etc. They cannot refuse to take back. And most importantly, which I have marked in bold, if they vouch the authenticity of goods or services, if they say this product is very good, then, or if they guarantee that something is authentic, okay, they have to bear that responsibility on themselves. So if there is an authenticity, they have to take that responsibility on themselves. So these are the important duties as far as the inventory-based e-commerce entities are concerned. So ultimately, what is it that these e-commerce players have to do in the context of protecting consumers and building trust and confidence here? Number one, active monitoring of the online platform, follow mandatory disclosures, update on industry specific compliance. There are a lot of industry specific compliance, like you have, if you are a food business operator, if you're selling food through the online platforms. So FSSAI comes in, or if there is something to do with insurance policies, and if you're a web aggregator for insurance policies, IRDAI comes in. So you'll have to follow those industry specific compliance as well. Build comprehensive terms and conditions and privacy policy for the organizations. Effective takedown policies are important. Complaint escalation mechanism, trying to have a robust complaint mechanism within the organization so that the consumers are benefited out of it. It is always good, and we really vouch for online dispute resolution, especially when it comes to e-commerce related disputes. They are a much better way in terms of resolving disputes online, and ultimately create trust and confidence. So these are a few points that I wanted to share with you in today's discussion. Thank you for patiently listening. Over to you, Akshay.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for a brief discussion on e-commerce and protection of consumers in e-commerce and IT. Now let us move into the question and answer sessions. There are n number of questions has been raised. So we'll be taking the important questions. So the first question is, as we are aware, many internet store post privacy statement as a policy not to share the consumer information to other business houses, like not to give their names and email addresses to the company, sending unwanted commercial email messages or junk mails, but the customer still receive the same. How can this issue be addressed in the said act?
Sir, would you want to take this question, sir?
Yeah. So here, as I have mentioned in the main legislation itself, unfair trade practice, they have added even deficiency in service. Whatever we are giving information to the seller, they should not share with anybody without their consent. But presently, there is no control. Everywhere, even if you purchase some chocolates without a mobile number or email, sometimes they will not give. Even the lot of big chains, retail shops, so they are doing, even though there is no need, but they are collecting data. Even offline also they have started collecting data. So as on now, under the legislation, whosoever collects the data, if they share without the consent of the consumer, it is civil wrong under the Consumer Protection Act, deficiency or unfair trade practice. Action can be taken against them. This mobile or email or whatever, any data, that is a privacy thing. Data protection should be there. So under the new act, the action can be taken against the wrongdoer. You can continue.
So talking about privacy policy, if you have read through a privacy policy, what it states is that there are certain reasons why these disclosures will have to be made. For example, your geographical location has to be provided to a logistics so that they can deliver the products to you. So they make it very clear as to why or where and how your information will be disclosed. But however, what happens here is there is absolutely no check as on today in terms of the information that is being shared amongst the e-commerce companies or even going outside. But where there is a possibility of sensitive information that is being disclosed, and if it is causing harm to me, if we are able to trace it back to the e-commerce portal where I did mention or where I did give this information and it has been shared with someone for which I have had a grievance, only then we will be able to take this before the consumer forums. Of course, we are also awaiting the personal data protection bill to be passed, and that will give us much more clarity and much more weightage in terms of the data protection. Thank you, Akshay.
The second question is, so the term digital product is been used in section 2 clause 16 and section 2 clause 46 of the CPA 2019. So what does it mean, and whether we can demarcate between the digital products and electronic networks? So is there any differentiate between this?
Sir, can I take this question?
Yeah, please.
Talking about digital products, like I did mention earlier, unlike the 1986 enactment where we had goods and services as two broad categories of products, today we have a third product which is called digital product. This actually wouldn't fall within either the complete ambit of goods or services. Like for example, if I'm subscribing to online movies or if I'm subscribing to ebooks, and if I have an issue with the subscription or some software which I'm procuring. So these are the subject matters which fall under the category of what we call as digital products. They are otherwise called as OIDERs, that is online database and information and access and retrieval systems. So that is OIDERs, that's what they call it as. But they are classified under a different category as digital products because they have some uniqueness in them and they're only subscriptions. You don't own them like products, or they are not purely services because it's not in the form of a service that you are being provided an online book or whatsoever it is. So they are subscription models and they are categorized under a third category. Now coming to digital networks and electronic networks, it is all of what we use through, through the use of technology. One is electronic networks. So it could be use of probably your laptops or mobile phones or any other device from which you're actually procuring all of these. When you say digital networks, sometimes there is use of technology, that is internet is being used for you to access the system itself, for you to access the service itself. For example, you cannot you cannot probably play a game offline. You have to play it online only. So they are digital networks. You have to use technology. You have to use internet to use these kind of products. So that is where the distinction between electronic networks and digital networks come in.
Would you like to add to this? So there's another question. So is consumer to consumer transactions covered under the e-commerce under the new CPA Act? So for examples, OLX and all. So whether these platforms can be covered under the same act?
Pratima, you can continue.
Yeah. Not really. It is just a platform. If at all you have an issue with OLX itself, or if there is a takedown that was required by OLX and they have not been in compliance, it's only then we can file a case against them. But otherwise, it's more of a C2C transaction, and that's not really covered under the Consumer Protection Act. That's in my opinion. Of course, if you have a grievance against the platform itself, of course you can go ahead.
There is a specific question to Pratima ma'am. What is that if e-commerce e-commerce entity should do even after removal of hazardous product, that is which is mandatory to be removed within 36 hours, or there is a time limit which needs to be removed if the e-commerce entity doesn't remove it from the website? So what is the liability on that?
Of course, today we will have issues of unfair trade practices and even deficiency in service. So we can bring them within the ambit of all of these provisions under the Consumer Protection Act today. Unfair trade practice, more so. It's a very elaborate definition which can include all of these within its ambit.
Especially these types of products, if they continue to sold in future also, even there is a clause, there is a section, especially it talks about section 39, the powers findings of the state district commission, where it clearly mentioned that it's unfair trade practice and suffered by large number of people who cannot be identifiable. Then 25% of the value of the goods or services sold can be imposed as a compensation. It goes to the consumer welfare fund. So that is also there.
Does another question, next question is, does new legislation address the transaction of cross borders and jurisdiction issues? How can one get relief in case of cross border transaction ordered through e-commerce of a defective product?
I touch upon the jurisdiction thing, especially now it is clearly mentioned territorial jurisdiction thing. So whosoever purchases goods or hires service, that person where he is situated, there he can file, or where cause of action arose. And additional one they have added, that is where consumer is residing and works for gain. So now wherever the consumer is residing, works for gain, that place, he can file a complaint depending on what is the level of pecuniary, the claim amount. On that basis, he can file in district commission or state commission or national commission.
Right.
Ma'am, would you like to add?
Yeah, just to add to sir, of course, today we have a jurisdiction, which is a larger jurisdiction, which talks about where the consumer resides. So he doesn't have to go jurisdiction hunting. But especially when it comes to cross-border purchases, the enforcement can be a little difficult, which is where it's always good to try on different dispute resolution mechanisms. The very first thing that the consumer would also have to do is to be aware of such transactions. Where is it located? Is it risky for me to buy it from such locations? Or even outside the country, there may be many such e-commerce platforms which can advertise something great. They can lure consumers, and ultimately they may not even be there. They may be cheating on consumers. So it is, again, buyer beware. We have to be aware on these platforms. We should know from whom we are buying and where are we buying it from, and do we even have a remedy just in case I have an issue with these products? These are some of the preliminary things that we have to keep in mind while we make our purchases, whether in India or outside cross-border. But however, there are some good e-commerce portals which do also provide for an online dispute resolution mechanism or such things of that sort. That can be very helpful for the consumers. But however, the bottom line being buyer beware, especially when it is a cross-border transaction.
Yeah, adding to Pratima, especially, yes, the state is protecting the consumers, coming out with them many legislations, many sections, improve version, but ultimately, as a consumer, is also having a responsibility. When he takes a decision, he has to apply common sense, and he has to, anyway, the solution will maybe there, but why you go to that extent? Before taking a decision, cross-check that particular e-commerce company. It's a standard service, many things you can cross-check. Afterwards, you take a decision from that particular e-commerce company you want to take or not. And especially now, because of the new rules, it is taking more effectively, it will be implemented. But if you want to purchase specifically from foreign based e-commerce company, even though if you have agreed, there are some companies, not the e-commerce type, but they are selling from their own website. If you purchase from that, if you got a defective product, and yes, you have a right to file a case in, assume that in Bangalore, you filed it, you won the case. Then how do you execute that particular decree, award? That person is sitting in foreign country, his property is in foreign country. It is very difficult for you to execute your decree or award. So that's why before taking any decision, you think twice, look into the reputation standard of the e-commerce company, then you decide.
The next question is, if the grievance is not redressed in the stipulated period of time, does the escalation ladder go up to the CP gram for accountability? So, ma'am, would you like to take this question?
Could you please repeat, Akshay?
Yeah,
I'm
ma'am.
not able to find the question.
If the grievance is not redressed in the stipulated period of time, does the escalation ladder go up to CP gram for accountability?
A CP graph, what is that?
So it is a the consumer helpline. So similar to like that of National Consumer Helpline.
Right. See, what happens here is the escalation goes something like this. You have it at the consumer level. Now, when you look at the definition of what a consumer dispute is, right? When does a dispute actually arise? When there is an agreed party. The party is aggrieved because the business has not agreed to what they require. So there is actually a grievance. There is a particular, the dispute has arisen because the other party has not accepted what they have said, right? So that is what a consumer dispute is. For them to reach to that level itself, there are certain escalation stages. Number one, the first escalation stage is always good to approach the consumer, the customer care itself, the customer service itself. Now, if that is not resolved, then you have the grievance officer. That happens at the company level. Now, if you are still not convinced at the company level, and then you can take it on to the next levels of probably approaching the helplines. What you do through the helplines is and there are many other NGOs also which are sort of enabling these consumers sort of, associate with the e-commerce business, and they try to help resolve the dispute. So they are all happening at the consumer helpline levels. And then comes the next, that is the grievance redressal machineries itself. So you are actually approaching the courts for resolving your consumer disputes. So first is at the complaint level itself. So it is called a consumer complaint. If that complaint is not resolved, then it takes it to the next level of a consumer dispute, where the the grievance redressal systems are always there. That is how the escalation should actually go.
In continuation with this case, with the question, if the simultaneous complaints have been filed in different sectors, such as ombudsman or redressal agency, and in consumer courts, which one will be prevailed, ma'am? Then,
in this case, especially it depends on. For example, let us take a example of insurance ombudsman. So, if it is an insurance case, then policyholder files a complaint to the insurance ombudsman, and if he gives a decision, then against the decision, if consumer is happy, settle the matter. But if you are not happy, then you can file a consumer complaint also. So that is allowed. And you cannot file a case in two places at a time. For example, even you have a right to file a case before the civil court. But same time, if you file a case before the Consumer Redressal Commission, that cannot be allowed, because same prayer before two redressal system, you cannot file at a time. And once you file in before the district commission, then under the district, the consumer redressal hierarchy, you have to go to the district commission to state commission to national commission. You cannot go to district commission against the district commission decision to the high court under writ petition. But there are some exceptions when question of law is there. There are some cases where they have gone, but if there is no question of law, then you should go in the hierarchy under the Consumer Protection Act.
ma'am, would you like to add?
No.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you for answering all the questions. Now, there are a number of questions because of the scarcity of time, we can't take all of the questions. So with this,
just a minute. Lot of questions which I'm seeing here. Whatever your experience in the past. Yes, during that time there was no new legislation 2019 and rules 2020. Now it is came into force. In future, things will change. Be positive. And even e-commerce companies, they reputed companies are there. They are eager to attract the new consumers. They want to stay in the market. So they have to satisfy these legal mandatory rules and regulations. At the same time, satisfaction to the consumers. We hope things will change, and these types of exploitation in future may come down. Thank you.
thank you, sir. Thank you so much. With this, we move on to the vote of thanks. So it's my honor and privilege to extend vote of thanks for the third day of National Webinar Series Consumer Protection Act 2019 Rules and Regulations. Today, I take this opportunity to put all my gratitude into words. On behalf of Chair on Consumer Law and Practice, National Law School of India University, I would like to thank our today's guest, Professor Dr. Ashok R. Patil and Ms. Pratima Narayan, for taking out their precious time and consenting to be the guest speaker for technical sessions 2. I also thank all the participants who have taken out their valuable time to attend this webinar. Thank you, everyone. I would also, lastly, I once again thank you one and all. With this, we conclude the technical session 2 of National Webinar Series on Consumer Protection Act 2019 Rules and Regulations. Kindly join us for the technical session 3 tomorrow sharply by 3:30 p.m. Thank you one and all. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.